Oh,
I heard you, Michael.
okay. And I hear you guys too now. Great. Sorry, we're a little late. Welcome,
Good
everyone.
afternoon.
Yes, yes. I won't hold us up any longer. We might as well just get started. I'm sure you guys are aware of the agenda, or actually, could you share that, Alexa, and then maybe we can just get rolling.
Yes, I can. I will pull it up. All right, well, I'm having issues pulling up the agenda, but I'll actually, Nate is going to go first by kicking us off. And then after that, Amy will give us an introduction to the 11th Ward. We'll pass it over to Taya. I will talk about engaging some communities within communities, and then Michael will throw it over to you for competition logistics at the end. So how about I toss it to Nate to go ahead and kick us off?
Great. Can everybody see this screen? This is our big overall view, and I can zoom in and out from here. So hi, good morning to all. This is for our newest Ed Bacon competition is a new one for us. So this is going to be a fun new approach to the way we take things, and I think you're going to learn a lot during this about our approach and how we're going to move through this. I want to just give you a brief overview of where this is in the site today, but with the caveat knowing that today is just sort of just so you know, we're not worried too much about it, and you'll learn more about that later on. So I wouldn't want you to get too fixated on what's there today, but should be aware. And so I will start with the basic where this is. So this is in Center City, Philadelphia. This is between 6th Street to our east and the Schuylkill River to our west, which is 24th Street or so. And then on the north end is Pine Street. On the south end is South Street. So that's 3 blocks in the north-south direction and over 20 blocks in the east-west direction, cutting right through Center City, Philadelphia. So that's this general area, Schuylkill River to our west, where my cursor is. This is Spruce Street as we come across. All the way down to 6th Street. And so when you see this today, it is all densely built up today. There are very few gaps in this entire stretch. It was very different in the past. But where we have our district, as we zoom in on these areas, there are public spaces scattered throughout this today. So along the river, it should be noted, historically, so this historic Black Sabbath Ward connects to the Schuylkill River. The Schuylkill River was not as well used as the Delaware River to our east. The Delaware River was the major shipping port. The Schuylkill River was sort of a little bit lesser, a little bit less developed, but there was access directly to the Schuylkill River. That's now a public access park along the edge. You skipping through different neighborhoods as we head back east. And so to the north of us here is this neighborhood of Fittler Square, very swanky, high-end neighborhood. The area directly where we are within our space is an area called Graduate Hospital, sort of an area over the last 20 years that has really changed and become more affluent and very different looking than it once did. As we move east across our site, we see locations where others can talk about the historic impacts in these locations, but we have, sorry, this is very clicky on my machine. When we come through, sorry, I do apologize. When we come through these areas, we see that the major north-south streets are really, our Philadelphia blocks are small. So these are not massive 1,000-foot long blocks. These are small, walkable, very tight-knit blocks. Topography of this area is almost dead flat. There's very little topography in this location of Philadelphia. It's very easy to walk. It's super connected. It feels small. It's all tightly knit. There's cultural institutions just to the north of these of this location, some mixed within. And I think all of this is available within Google Street View or any other Street View services. You can really get a feel for what's there today. Again, fully built up, mix of industrial uses, lots of residential mixed within, some public spaces scattered in. To the far east is Washington Square and Washington Square West, probably the area that's of the most affluent of all of this area today, and is becoming more as it changes from a historic area back in that area where it was everything. The founding of the country was happening just north of there a few years before us. A few years later, now we're into this area where it's changing, and it's become, at the time of the Black 7th Ward, this what we call Washington Square was very different, and others can speak to that as we get into it. But that's the general idea. So we're in Center City, Philadelphia. We are from 6th Street until the Schuylkill River. That's our east-west boundaries. And our north-south boundaries are Pine to the north, south to the south end. We're about 20 blocks east to west and about 3 blocks north to south. So I will leave it there and pass it on to Amy, who's going to get really into the good details of what we're trying to do here.
Thanks so much, Nate. If you'd stop sharing your screen, I'll go ahead and share mine. Great. Great. Hopefully folks can see my my slide. I can only imagine if Edmund Bacon and W.E.B. Du Bois had been able to have a conversation about the 7th Ward, how rich that conversation would have been. W.E.B. Du Bois was perhaps the greatest civil rights leader and one of the greatest scholars we've ever had in the United States, born just after the Civil War in the 1860s and died in 1960s, the day before Martin Luther King gave his "I Have a Dream" speech. So he lived a very long life, as did Edmund Bacon, and both had really profound influence on their professions. I'm going to focus on the part of the history that when W.E.B. Du Bois came and did a study of Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Negro. He was invited by the White College Settlement Association social workers, which is part of how I got involved as a white woman in this story, and the University of Pennsylvania, where I work, and did a study of the 7th Ward. And a lot, it's one of the most powerful parts of the story and sources of information. And so part of mine is, I know you will not be engaging directly with residents, but there's so many stories and so many rich traditions and so many institutions for you to learn about. I'm just going to give you a few of these stories and institutions, and I've prepared some additional resources. You'll see historical maps, historical photographs. Philadelphia has such rich archives. There's so much that you can do. This is such a well-documented area, and yet there's so many stories that people don't know. So I'm very excited. This is the focus of the prize. So Du Bois was 28 years old when he came to Philadelphia in 1896. He was the first Black man to receive a PhD from Harvard. And this is the map he made. I've made available a high resolution TIFF of it because I imagine it's something that could give you all some inspiration. Du Bois went door to door and interviewed all of the Black households. So this map of this long, skinny area that we were just talking about, Seventh Ward, the Black people tended to live on the lower half of this in the in 1897 when Du Bois would have done this, and so where the white people lived were left blank. But you see, it was very important to him to talk about Black heterogeneity, to talk about Black social class structure. This was in the 1890s at a time when Black people's rights, legal rights, political rights, and even humanity was being denied by scientific racism, by various forms of institutional racism, and also by violence. This area, like much of Philadelphia, has been marked by racial violence. And you see some of Du Bois' moralisms, Victorian moralisms caked into this. But you can see it was really important for him to show how Black people across social class were living together in the Seventh Ward. So this was the heart of Black Philadelphia for many decades. Philadelphia had more Black people than any city in the North in the late 19th century. So after the Civil War, there was a lot of migration, and a lot of people had been born and raised in Philadelphia. And then gradually we know that population moved out by choice and not by choice. So there was push and pull factors that left us with a neighborhood that is predominantly white today, probably 90+% white, and much wealthier than it was at the time. I with my students have built an interactive GIS. So if that's something that will be useful to you, this is the 1900 census data to show you that, yes, it was the heart of Black Philadelphia. You see the shades of dark red and the pink, which are people who were born in Pennsylvania and Black people who had migrated from the South. But you also see just an incredible constellation of other European immigrants, US born white people, Irish, and in particular the neighborhood around 7th and South, over near Mother Bethel, a significant Russian Jewish population at the turn of the century. And this is a portrait that somebody painted for us of Fanny Jackson Coppin, who is one of those remarkable figures. She was married to the bishop and minister at Mother Bethel, Levi Coppin, and she also was the head of the Institute for Colored Youth, which is a really key institution just south of the 7th Ward, but certainly fair game and something I hope you will research. Today there's a mural that honors Du Bois and his research, but there aren't a lot of there are blue markers throughout, historical markers to remind people of some of this rich Black history. Many of the institutions are no longer there. Mother Bethel AME Church, of course, is still there. But that's one of the reasons we thought it was important to have a mural. And that's very common in Philadelphia, to have murals on blank walls where there might, maybe there's a vacant lot or otherwise just a blank canvas. And this honors Engine Company number 11, which was a segregated Black firehouse off to one side. And then the other side is Du Bois. I'll just show you, in terms of some of the resources. Here's the photograph that we gave the muralist. So see, this is Du Bois when he was at the NAACP later on in his life. The muralist used that. And just in terms of how historically inspired many of these murals are, this is an archival photograph. And while the people here are not the people pictured, you see the background, the lantern, and the buildings are all exactly. And Willis Humphrey was an amazing muralist who sadly died at about age 50 from heart failure, but he also did our mural of Octavius Catto, who was another real hero of this neighborhood. And some of these people, this is Du Bois in the middle, but the second person in, Ms. Veronica Hodges, actually lived in this neighborhood, a Black woman whose grandmother had been born into slavery in the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and she lived here in the 7th Ward. And we made a short documentary about her family. So again, just rich layers of stories and people who have lived here. I mentioned Octavius Catto, who was a civil rights leader before Du Bois. He organized Black troops during the Civil War, and he led the Pythians Black Baseball League. Baseball was segregated even in Philadelphia, even in the North. There was a different version of segregation than what we had in the South, but certainly active segregation. He helped to desegregate the trolleys in Philadelphia. There's now a statue for him just south of City Hall. And so that's the statue of him, which is just a, is incredible, incredible landmark and place for center of protest during 2020 uprisings. He had a school after he was shot and killed on 1871 on South Street, right here by the rooming house where he lived. He had been at the Institute for Colored Youth as a teacher. He was shot and killed because he was trying to get to the polls to help Black people vote in 1871. Even at that point, Black people were having trouble voting in Philadelphia. So this school for colored youth was named for him. This is the mural that Willis Humphrey piece from the mural. And then his fiancee, Caroline LeCount, also a very well-educated Black woman who was a teacher. She went on to be the principal at the church, at the school where that was named for him. And just to give you a sense of how much this neighborhood has changed, this is what's there now. That became an empty lot, and it's now the Lombard Swim Club. So this is one of the this is the landscape that we're looking at, how changed, where there is no reference to Caddo as far as I know at the swim club. And you can see on the original Bromley map. Another really important story, I just have two more to share, is the Crosstown Expressway. It was supposed to be named 695. It was supposed to go from across the river to river. We know, those are familiar with Philadelphia know 676, which was the Vine Street Expressway. There was for decades, there were plans to have an expressway go across South Street, which would have really devastated this neighborhood. And in many ways it did. It led to significant disinvestment, particularly Black homeowners and Black businesses got up and left South Street. And Denise Scott Brown, who folks know history of architecture in Philadelphia, and a photographer and architect, was very involved in fighting that. And the Crosstown Expressway was a cross-racial coalition. And the person pictured here, Alice Lipscomb, was another leader, a community member, leader. And they were successful. They did block the expressway. It still led to a lot of disinvestment, which allowed for reinvestment, but it was very different from what we saw at the time that Du Bois was there. And now just south of South Street, there are the Alice Lipscomb Homes, affordable housing that was named for her. Just the last institution I wanted to mention, just in terms of how vibrant this community was the Royal Theater. The Standard Theater was another one, but the Royal Theater was like the place. Everybody who was anybody played at the Royal Theater. This was at 15th and South. It's marked with a blue marker, and as has happened, this is the architectural drawing, but it's pretty much what happened. The veneer, the front of the edifice of the building was maintained and then completely redeveloped. Those are some of the models. We have institutions that have been demolished or fell apart, moved out of the neighborhood, and others that have been preserved as condominiums, but very few of them that are used as according to their original use. So again, just to encourage you to look for historical maps, historical photographs, read up about some of these people, these institutions, to really help your projects come alive.
Amy, thank you so much for that. That was a great consolidated all of the great stories that are there in the 7th Ward. Some of them, not all of them. Thank you for sharing that. I definitely encourage the students to dig into those a little bit more in order to understand the context. Taya, I'd love to pass it over to you.
Great. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, we are going to talk a little bit today about cultural competency in the built environment. This is by far not going to give you an intense study on any of these things. Each of these could be a dissertation in themselves, but just to give you a little bit of an overview about some things to keep in mind as you're moving into your project. And the big thing that you want to think about is what happens to areas impacted by our urban moves in architecture. But first, we want to start with ourselves. And today, I hope at the end of this very brief presentation, you'll understand your own personal identity in an intersectional way, better understand how layers of impression imposed by systems and institutions can disproportionately affect those who are marginalized, and to encourage and empower you as students to really bring your whole self to this creative process as you move forward in the baking competition. And so I want to start first with sort of a premise on intersectionality, which is really this idea that we are all layers, right? People are onions, and that we have no unitary identity. and that across this wheel, there's many of these lines that intersect to create key parts of our identities as human beings on this planet. Through the middle, there's a line, and anything above that line, if we're talking about our US context, is considered the dominant culture, and anything below that line is one of oppression and resistance, and is typically considered to be marginalized. This becomes really important as we think through some of the demographics of the people who used to live in this neighborhood versus the demographics of the people that currently live in this neighborhood that Amy Hillier shared with us in her last presentation. I did want to have a little brief explanation of intersectionality.
Intersectionality is just
you
a
all hear that?
metaphor for understanding the ways that multiple forms of inequality or disadvantage sometimes compound themselves, and they create obstacles that often are not understood within conventional ways of thinking about anti-racism or feminism or whatever social justice advocacy structures we have. Intersectionality isn't so much a grand theory, it's a prism for understanding certain kinds of problems. African American girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended than white girls. That's probably a race and a gender problem. It's not just a race problem, it's not just a gender problem. So I encourage people to think about how the convergence of race stereotypes or gender stereotypes might actually play out in the classroom, between teachers and students, between students and other students, between students and administrators, and commit themselves to understanding that as a way of intervening and providing equal educational opportunity for all students, regardless of their identities. Identity isn't simply a self-contained unit. It is a relationship between people in history, people in communities, people in institutions. So schools do a good job when they understand that and when they commit themselves to curricular development, to opportunities in the school for all students to understand the histories that have brought us to this particular moment. You can't change outcomes without understanding how they've come about. So independent schools can take the lead on that to be responsive to their student populations and to the communities out of which the students come.
And Dr. Kinshaw is one of the foremost experts in the United States on intersectionality. So I encourage everyone to read more of her work if you want to know more. But then we have to jump and think about both us as individuals, but also the field that we work in. And I'm referencing some excerpts from the book Race in Modern Architecture that was released during the pandemic that started to look at the intersection of the built environment, architecture, and race, and really understanding that the framework of our profession has been one that was based on a very Western ideal that focused and prioritized white culture. And that's something that in our context really didn't exist until the 1970s in the way that we understand it now. And so because this is a neighborhood that's dealing with so many issues that are intersected with race, to remind us all that race is a social construction, like we've made it up as people, and that they are completely invented by society as ways to both divide as well as categorize people for different reasons, mostly around power. That it is about power, and that it sort of was invented in parallel with imperialism or colonialism and sort of chattel slavery, which existed in many countries, but had a profound impact on our society structures here in the United States. And that by existing and by us proliferating it and continuing its practices, that it serves a purpose, right? It is giving material advantages, money, power, influence to what we have defined as the dominant race. It's not just like how a person feels or thinks about someone, that it has all of these other intrinsic effects, which we know. And so as we're moving through the project, I want us to all sort of think about the types of unconscious biases that we each carry based on our individual intersections that influence both how we work, because as designers, it's something that's really integral to the way that we think and we process how we design things. And there's really 4 key biases. There's affinity bias, which is when we feel closer connections to people that are similar to us. And that can be on any of those lines. I mean, I myself now work in community development, but my background's in architecture, and I know I always have an affinity for architects. I understand the way we think because I was educated the same way. We have perception bias, which is around the ways that we think about and stereotype around different groups of people. These can be both positive and negative. There's, many biases that we carry in that space. Some of them considered are funny, and the ones that are positive we often excuse, but then we call out the ones that are negative. But they're all unfair assessments of what a person is or can do. There's halo effect, right? There's us projecting positive qualities onto people before we know them. This could be because they're celebrities or they're influencers or they remind us of something that it overlaps one of our own individual intersections. We see this happen the most right now in social media. And then we have confirmation bias, which is when we already think something and we look for clues that are going to reaffirm what we already believe. And these all become really important when we're looking at site context to try to determine how to move forward with a project that influence our sort of base understanding of what we're going to do. And I want to challenge everyone through this project to confront our assumptions. This is an example of some imagery that my office recently used to talk about the stakeholders in our office. We mostly work with professional design volunteers, where we were trying to challenge the typical assumptions of what an engineer, architect, construction worker, landscape architect might look like in our field, that represented some of the people that were already volunteering with us. So just remind us to always challenge these assumptions. And as we sort of expand this out to think about the Philadelphia context in the built environment, I want to remind us all that for every injustice, that there's an architecture and a plan and a design that sustains it, that allows it to continue and has allowed it to bring us to this point now. And that we have racist policies that still carry effects today. I think specifically when we want to think about how race and the intersection of race in the built environment, two really pivotal maps that have had a profound impact even on the site that we're talking about today, are urban renewal and redlining. And they have had both direct impacts as well as domino effects based on how they were affecting the general society of Philadelphia over time. And that's really important to sort of contextualize with the history of African Americans in our country. When we look at American slavery, which really started in 1526, and we look at the period of segregation, the study, Philadelphia Negro, started in 1899 when Du Bois was studying Philadelphia, really happens like almost square in the middle of segregation. But a lot of the policies that changed to the built environment shifting in that neighborhood, a lot of the demolitions, a lot of the new construction and the new redevelopments of the 7th Ward were happening in 1954, which is post-segregation. And while it's sort of shown in green on this map, we know that there's a lot of layers to unpacking what green really means when we got rid of segregation and how other governmental policies, decision-making, and other trends in real estate have sort of affected places. And that's really important when we're starting to think about how architecture impacts spaces. I want to show a brief quote that reflects on sort of the history of this
South Street and
neighborhood.
Lombard Street, when I was real little, they were black neighborhoods. By the time I got to be a teenager, there was the first gentrification wave was Society Hill, and the blacks who lived on Lombard Street were gone. Then it moved over to South Street, a kind of erasure.
City policy brokers did not consult with the very people that were being removed from their homes. Everyday people feeling like they didn't have control or say over their lives, over where they lived, where they could send their kids to school.
Many are the sins of urban renewal, but Society Hill became the model all
All right,
around.
we're going to pause. So while this was about Society Hill, which is a neighboring neighborhood, a lot of their
Country.
references are about people that were living on Lombard Street, which is in this neighborhood. And to really understand the context that we had working class Irish and German and Polish and Italian families living side by side, and Jewish families living side by side with Black families that were in this area. And a lot of what caused shifts in this neighborhood were around housing policy changes that were happening in Philadelphia. There was a big wave that happened starting around 1934 that started to catalog blighted or derelict properties in the neighborhood. There was a big push to relocate people to different parts of the city where there was better housing, which led in a big exodus at that point of a lot of that Black population to North Philadelphia with the birth of the Philadelphia Housing Authority. And then there was a secondary push that didn't happen later, and from like mid-1950s into the 1970s, as we saw a lot of city funding and a lot of federal funding come down that were allowing for new redevelopments of the community, which is when we started to see a lot of the changes that we're expecting now. There was then a third wave that happened in the 90s with the creation of things like the Kimmel Center and the further expansion of Center City as we now know it today. So I think it's important to remember that a lot of these policies, these processes and practices that we are aware of that shaped our city were rooted in racism, and that we as practitioners are really responsible for reversing those harms and some of that violence that's happened in those communities. While this is a speculative project, it still is a chance to sort of practice some of those aspects of how we might think about how we want to be as practitioners in the future. And to introduce this idea of design justice, which is sort of a burgeoning framework in the field that really starts to challenge that privilege and those power structures, that has architecture and design serve as tools of oppression, and really move forward radical efforts around thinking better about racial, social, and cultural reparation as something that we can influence as well as be an outcome of our designs. And so some of the key questions that we want to think of in those instances are like, who benefits from the design? Who's harmed by the design? Who participated in the process? Now, in this instance, you're not going to be going out to the community as a whole, but to think sort of through those first two questions as a framework and a guide in lieu of sort of going to the community. And some things that I think we could think about as we center justice is really, what are things that we can bring into this project? And I sort of have 4 tips. 1, to use intentionality in the detailing of our representation styles. This could be as simple as having entourage that is representative of the demographics that you're trying to address in this community. Being specific around language that is used in oral and written presentations or explanations. This can be as small as your captions, or things that you're using to describe any diagrams or images, or even in your narrative write-ups. Things telling, people don't want to hear things like this neighborhood is bad, or, the houses were terrible. And I think that's also really important to root our design cues and decisions in the real context, facts, or information, and not just our assumptions or interpretations of things that we read or see, as well as having honesty and transparency in that design intent, while managing expectations. This is a competition project. It's not going to be built. And understanding that there's some opportunities there to dream and really think differently about what this could be. And I just want to sort of leave you with this quote that I leave at the end of most of my presentations by Brian Stevenson of the Equal Justice Initiative, that when you can identify injustice, when you can identify inequality and unfairness, and you confront that, then in my mind, you are doing justice. You are doing something corrective to the abuse of power that is at the heart of injustice, and to the bigotry and bias that is often at the heart of injustice. So in a lot of ways, identifying injustice and confronting it and challenging it is what justice is about. And I hope that everyone here will really see the Bacon competition as an opportunity to really challenge that idea of justice and ways that we can use design to improve the lives of the people around us.
Thank you, Taya. That was fantastic, and really a great framework that we should all be thinking about our power as designers, and involved in the built environment. Taya mentioned, it's only going to take a few minutes. Taya mentioned what you all know, which is that this is a design competition, and it is sort of a theoretical ideas exchange. It's not going to be something that is intentionally built, it's built, which is why we have asked you to not be doing any specific community engagement around this competition. The reason for that, I thought maybe deserved a little bit more of an explanation, but they're, working in communities, sort of like the classified underserved communities, people that are sort of working to do this justice, to confront these challenges, as you mentioned, Taya, they're very overburdened. Engagement fatigue is a real thing. People feel as if they are sharing their thoughts and sharing their time and giving to things that aren't necessarily going to have immediate impacts on them. And so we very much value the stories and the histories and the experiences of people that are in these communities. But given the nature of this as an ideas challenge only, that is why we've requested that you not go into these communities and start asking people questions and utilize and taking their time. That being said, while I had you all here, I thought that it would be sort of a good idea to think about how one would engage with communities, because you are all going to go into the world and be doing this. So I wanted to very quickly break it down to sort of what I've classified as these 5 essential elements of what a quality engagement strategy plan would look like. Well, it's numbered, so it's easy. We'll start at number 1. Number 1 is to always have a clear purpose. This might seem like common sense, but making sure that you are very transparent about what your role is in the project, what their role is, what the outcomes of a project will be, where their input will have value, or where it will be able to sort of have impact, and where their input won't be able to have impact, right? So as an example, you don't want to go into a neighborhood and say, do you guys need a whole lot more affordable housing, when you're designing, you know, a traffic triangle, right? So you want to make sure that everything is very transparent. People understand where their role is and where the decision-making power lies. This is an excellent task for any sort of design team to go through internally before they start the process, is to make sure you know where those decision points are. If it's just a matter that people can pick colors, or people can actually pick design layouts. So looking at that. Number 2 is to always involve community organizations. Now, these organizations could be local development corporations, faith-based institutions, business improvement districts. They could be community leaders, you know, block captains. There's a big block captain culture in Philadelphia, where the block captains really have the sort of the ears and the hearts of the people that are on their block, and can gather them and speak for them or with them. And then also stakeholders that might be involved in that. So all of these community organizations that are most likely place-based in this place, have been there and have been building trust with community members in a way that a design team will not have when they walk into that. So working with community organizations, finding those partnerships, being able to provide value to them, will allow you to get the real answers to questions that you're asking, instead of just the answers that people think you want to hear, because you are working with people that are already embedded in those neighborhoods. Number 3 is around sort of providing opportunities for people to provide feedback or expertise. You know, there's looking at sort of opportunities for flexibility. You know, not everyone will necessarily be available at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday evening to attend a town hall in a church basement or a local area. Some people have jobs that aren't traditional. Some people have children or parents that they are responsible for. Some people, you know, there will be folks that turn up, but you want to make sure that you're providing opportunities for everyone else that isn't during there. So engagement's not one size fits all. So what we like to do in our work is we try to find ways that not only flexibility of when these meetings are happening, but flexibility of how much time people want to contribute to a particular process, right? Someone might want to come to a 3 workshop series to like really dive in and do something, and they're going to have the time to commit to that. Other people might want to like take a photo and send it in or submit something, right? So some people and other people might only want to be informed about what the process is. And so providing opportunities for people that want to dive in, and people that just want to be kept informed to be kept informed, in all those scales between is very important. Number 4, I already sort of talked about this before, but making sure that you're providing value to your participants. I mentioned that people have engagement fatigue. So let's make sure that it's not just an exhausting process that we're asking people to join us on, that it's something that they walk away and feel like they've gained something, right? Now, that value can certainly be monetary in value, making sure that you're stipending folks that are spending large amounts of time with you. Having incentives associated with surveys or other things can also provide a value. Being able to connect people with resources, being able to connect people with things that they walk away with and can hold on to. Any way that it becomes a reciprocal relationship, because makes it a better relationship, right? So the design team, when working with communities, is gaining an enormous amount of value from that sort of place-based community expertise, right? We don't live in these communities. We sort of don't know the primary concerns or the sort of organizing momentum that's happening there. So they are providing us value. We want to make sure that we are giving them equal or more value back. And then number 5 is the best one, because you want to make sure to keep all of these things fun. If that means parties and DJs and food, please always food. Keeping it fun is another way to provide value. So this sort of sums it all up. I just want to let you know that I'm with Henge Collective. We actually have a bunch of resources available on our website to download, and this is sort of the idea that I gave, but you can download a lot more information with sort of questions to help lead your team through some of these, if that is helpful. All right, thanks. And Michael, I will pass it over to you for some competition specifics.
Thank you. I'm so proud of the Bacon Committee and what they've done today in terms of framing what we really would love to happen in this competition. Thank you guys. Excellent job on all the things, history, competency, and engagement. Excellent job. I just want to share with all of the students here and those who will be interested in joining us later, some of the particulars about the project. And I'll share my screen and just go through the brief with you guys. So we can all see what it is we are talking about and sharing. I'm sorry, just give me a minute as I move some things out of the way and we'll be able to share. Okay, so entry fees and the prize you see here, $25 entrance fee and $5,000 for the first grand prize. Our important dates, today we're here as a required workshop that you must see and also just engage before entering competition, where we will have a deadline for questions, October 6th, and our final date to submit entries will be January 31st, 2024. We have now determined that our award ceremony will be held March 7th, 2024. So we ask that all of you, if you can, please plan to attend here at the Center for Architecture and Design in Philadelphia at that time. This is the Edmund Bacon competition, and every year we also celebrate a planner that has made significant contributions to the profession in honor of Ed Bacon and his contributions as well. Nate has gone through the actual scope of our project and what you will be looking at in terms of proposing these designs. And what I'd like to actually really encourage you guys is to look at the history of the 7th.
Michael, we just lost you. Maybe you muted? You're still sharing your screen, but you've gone black with no sound. Hmm.
Don't worry, we'll fix this in editing.
I assume he's got logged out and is coming back.
I'm gonna message him just to see on Teams and see.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
gonna assume it was the internet, the way it went out.
Yes.
Yeah,
The internet
poor
went out.
Michael.
He just texted me. He's trying to get back in now.
Great. Thanks, Carly.
What a trooper. What a trooper.
Unfortunately, I do not know what he is about to say, so I'm not able to pick that up for him.
Did we jump to Q&A in the meantime?
Yes. Yes.
There's a just for time. I know we've got a few of the students here.
Yes, and we will do our best to answer your questions without Michael, who might have the answers. But are there any questions from students that are here? You can either raise your hand or put them in the chat.
Hi, Kim here. I'm actually not a student. I'm an instructor at Drexel University, and I was wondering if the interior design students would be able to participate in this activity as well, since we do get started a bit late in Drexel.
There's no discipline requirement, so if they can do the work, they're welcome to participate.
Awesome, thanks.
Great. Are there any more questions about scope or eligibility? I love the idea of having interior designers as part of it. We do, I mean, I will add to what Nate was saying, which was we really do encourage sort of cross-disciplinary teams. This competition is a great opportunity to sort of like find peers in other areas that are going to have different perspectives and different approaches to the sort of, you know, thinking about this design challenge. And so I would encourage anyone to take advantage of this as an opportunity to pair up with folks in other areas in order to expand your own perceptions as well.
Apologies, team, I'm back. I lost my internet connection. And I'm sure the team actually spoke to, again, the essence of this competition. With the time that we have left, I just want to point out one particular part of the brief that I think it's important for us to update you on. The rest of the brief reads pretty much for itself, particularly the background and the intent, and it was covered so well by the committee here. But I want to point you to the requirements that we have for the project, and I will share my screen again so we might be able to see that together. So, of course, the eligibility requirements, as I heard Alexis saying, that there can be cross-disciplinary teams, but you must be a matriculating student in the fall of 2023. Our boards, again, project titles, defining your images, renderings, and diagrams. The piece that I want to bring your attention to is part of the programming, transportation, and those pieces. This is a visionary competition. The programming is really up to you, and not necessarily based on what may have happened in some of our previous competitions, which some of this boilerplate information has carried over. So I want to be clear that there's some things here that we will be updating in terms of text and intent that you should be aware of. Programming is one. Transportation, although part of what you might be designing, is not a necessarily requirement that you need to address. Because this is a visionary competition, what you propose in terms of what your intent will be actually looked at and judged considering. Service, in terms of servicing the public, quite frankly, is what you imagine it to be in terms of how this competition will play out in terms of your intent again. This particular piece, again, will be updated with language that will better reflect what the competition is about, as well as the public space. The effective use of the land will be actually stricken. And again, this is your vision, your intent of what this project will be. So the wording in terms of the requirements for that will also be updated and adjusted. The actual elements that you can include, of course, diagrams, text to describe your proposals, all written out there in particular type sizes and styles that you can use to be eligible for this. It is important that in your slideshow, that you present information that is both legible and, of course, readable, no transitional slides. We have our jurors looking at this fairly quickly in a limited amount of time, so the ease that they can go through the slideshow will definitely help your entrance. Slideshows must consist of exactly 9 slides in widescreen format, so please thoroughly review all the requirements in terms of the submission of the slideshow so that we might be able to have the judges be able to manage that process as well. The other requirements in terms of submission, again, all the dates mentioned here, the times, where you should submit, please review carefully what those pieces are and that they might be delivered to us on time so that we might be able to share them with the jurors for proper judging. And then finally, in the judging aspect, the 3 pieces, again, that we have here about the ability to have your entrance judge will be updated to better reflect what it is we will be doing for the competition. So wanted to open it up generally for any questions that you might have about the competition itself, and also any other requirements, deadlines, and dates that we have, and to do that fairly quickly. So we might be able to turn that over to Nate for our closing. So I will stop share, and if there are any questions that I might be able to answer, please feel free to do so at this time.
Hi, Michael. I have a quick question. Thank you,
Sure.
everyone, for presenting and sharing this. I'm currently a student, but I'm taking a gap year for my program for the fall and the spring this year. Am I still able to be a part of a team or to apply myself?
I believe if you're part of a team that is matriculating at this time, that you may be eligible. I will look more closely into our eligibility requirements and make sure that I get back to you with that information. That's my first kind of like inclination of what could happen, but I really need to go back and check that, and we'll inform you of that decision.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question. Any other questions? Okay, if there aren't any other questions, Nate, maybe you can close this out.
Absolutely. So I hope this was enjoyable for all. This is our intent with this is to strengthen your empathy muscles. And the more you can do that, the better designers you will all be. And I think the most important thing to know about this is the dream competition. We want you to think as big as possible. Do not be restricted by reality. Dream. We want you to have this as a sort of vision of what could be, of what maybe things would have been if the world worked out a little bit differently. So please dream on this. If you have questions, we're always here. And I thank you all for being willing to sit through this and participate in this competition.